Alan, oh my gosh, I think that was enough time for you to take the mic and tell us 5 reasons why people don't like your forms. Take it away, Alan.
Okay, well, thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Lindsay, for that sterling introduction. Of course, Lindsay omitted to mention her own part in karaoke, so I think there's probably some video somewhere that maybe we can share, Ryan. I'll send you the link sometime. But
Excellent. Can't wait.
today is all about forms, as we talked about, and specifically why people are dropping off forms. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of this, let's ask a quick question. And I'm glad that we do have cameras on for some people because it's participatory. So the question for you is, who here likes filling in online forms? So are there any hands that are going up? I can't see any at the moment. There's usually like one nerd or crazy person like me that actually enjoys the process of filling in forms. But the point is that no one really likes filling in forms. So every time you put a form on a website and you want someone to give you information, it's not something they're enjoying doing. It's a slog for them. So therefore, you've got to be very careful and very mindful of that fact and not annoy them and piss them off unnecessarily. So that's always the key point there, because sometimes people can be blasé about forms. It's often, a lot of forms on websites are very similar to ones that we used to get in paper. You go into a bank, you get a form, and often it's pretty much the same as it comes through. So you end up with beautiful forms, perhaps like these ones here. Examples, some forms that I say the one on the left seems to have just been imported from a paper form, but stick a nice little capture on the bottom. The one on the right has got a crazy long drop down, not thinking about users. I mean, if you have a look at that, I don't know if you can see on your screen, there's some lovely titles there, like the Marquess, Rabbi, Group Captain, Wing Commander, things like that. That actually, most people are just like, what's going on there? But I guess the general point is people don't like filling in forms. And if you think it's just me, then I'd like to show you a short video which can bring it to life a lot better than I can in terms of online forms and the problems that they can cause for users. So I'll let this run for about a few minutes and then we'll take it from there.
And I understand that, you put.
So I think I saw some smiles of recognition there in terms of forms and form frustration that we all get on a day-to-day basis. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we get into that, why should you listen to me in particular? Well, I think Lindsay talked about earlier that I'm MD of Zuko Analytics. We're a form analytics software provider that basically tracks behavior on forms, identifies where the issues are, that feeds into the UX research and the experimentation to improve those forms. And we've been doing it for a decade now. So we've seen pretty much virtually every mistake you can see on a form. And so what I'm going to do today is, while there are hundreds of reasons why someone would drop off a form, I'm just going to talk about 5 broad reasons as to why someone would be dropping off your form and what you can do to do about that at all. So 5 of them. First one we'll talk about is probably the simplest one. Broken forms. Something's up with a form. Someone can't do what they want to do because usually a technical issue. So a simple example here, we've got a nuke button where in this example, if you don't get every field right, you click register now, it deletes everything. So obviously when you've got a situation like that, you're going to lose a lot of people just because they make one mistake or leave one field blank. So obviously that's a broken thing. And in many cases, when we're looking at forms, there are different solutions and you want to test them. But in some cases like this, it's just fix it, get it done. And similarly, another example here, we've got placeholders that are not disappearing when someone enters their information. So, you see this sort of stuff all the time. Forms not been properly QA'd. Again, you want to fix it. Other examples, errors, multiple errors showing at once, those on the left, or also errors that persist even when you fix them. They stick around and annoy people and think, oh, shall I fix this? So again, these are fairly obvious. If you do any sort of run through of a form, you should pick them up anyway, even without analytics. But it's important to also look at things which might not obviously be broken, but might seem broken to users. One example we see a lot of is the one on the left, which is disabled buttons, which often seem great to UX designers. You can't click the next button unless you fill the form in perfectly, because then you know it's going to be okay and we're going to move on. But when you watch people react to these, they think they're broken. They just go down. You'll see them trying to click on the button, confusing people. They're not sure what to do. So again, you've got to look out for breaks like that. Other example on the right hand side is to do with the validation, and that's over strict validation. In this case, we're talking about the phone number, which will come up multiple times today, so spoiler alert. Essentially, in this case, it's a form rejecting a phone number because someone's put spaces or dashes in there, which again is often one of the most annoying things for users. They will enter their information as they usually do, often with a space, but you're telling them that it's wrong and you're not telling them why. So therefore, again, these sort of frustrations make it seem to the user that the field is broken, so that is causing them to drop out. So again, always look out for that. Make sure you do a run through test of your forms. And finally on this is even something simple like HTML type. I'm sure we've all been on a phone trying to enter a phone number in a field, and rather than getting the number keyboard, you get the thing on the right. You just get the letters, and you've got to then try and tap through and get your numbers up there. So simple things like making sure you got the most appropriate HTML type so the right keyboard comes up in when someone's using a mobile device. So that's the first broad segment, which is all about break. We're going to go a bit more specific now. First one is the next one is about managing expectations. So this is all about making sure the user knows what's expected of them, and often that is not done at all, and it often causes drop off. So classic example of that is you jump on someone halfway through the form, asking them with some information that they don't have to hand. That could be driver's license number, social security number, passport number. And what happens? Someone gets asked for their passport number. Oh, crikey, where's my passport? They run away, they go upstairs, try and find the passport, see if they find it. Sometimes they don't come back. You often see it, and we see it in the data. When you ask a question like this, people will go away, they'll get distracted, they'll come, oh, what am I doing? And they don't fill in your form. So it's an issue if you're doing that, and potentially even worse, if they do come back and they get a timed out message like that. I'm sure we've all done that. You go away to get something, come back, timed out. You can pretty much guarantee they're not going to spend another 10 minutes refilling in all of the questions you've already asked them if you're doing this halfway through. So what's the fix? Fairly simple. It's all about expectations, telling them upfront what they need. So if you're asking for any level of complicated information, make sure there's a page at the start of the form field telling them how long it's going to take, telling them what they need, and you'll find the completion rate of the form goes up, because essentially what they'll do is they won't start the form until they've got the information together. So again, we've seen tests and experiments that have really good results there. That's for the form as a whole. If we take one specific field as well, it can be useful to think about expectations, and that field is the password field. So we've got an example here where someone's asking for password, they're asking confirm password, they're then going in, clicking the verification button, and then, regardless of the fact this is a terrible form in many ways, you can't even read what's going on, but they thought they'd entered a password, but it was only after they'd clicked enter, they were told what was wrong with the password, that you need 8 characters, you need special characters, etc. So again, this is something you need to be aware of whenever you're asking anything, is make sure you're telling people what's going on and what's expected of them. So both on a form level, but on an individual question level as well. Obviously, the fix in this case is essentially stipulate the requirements, and often you see some good patterns where it's clear what people need, and also that it kind of ticks off when they do it. So there's some validation. So people are like, okay, my password is correct. I'm not going to get thrown out when I click submit at the end. And bringing it on to other fields, what I'm sharing with you here is some data that we have. We obviously see thousands of forms. So we see the common form fields, and we see which of those are more likely to cause user drop-off. So the figure you see here is the average abandonment rate for each of these common form fields. And so you'll see the password at the top is by far the highest. 10% of people interacting with the average password field will drop out on it. And I'm sure we've all dropped out on a password field because they're horrible. But if you look at the next one's phone number and email, they're also pretty substantial. You've got to take them into account if you're asking for these on your form. And the fix often, again, is tell them why you're asking for it. So phone number, I said we'd come back to it. Again, another show of hands. Hands up if you've ever put a fake phone number into a form field. I can see a lot more hands now than previously. Because again, people hate being asked for their phone number because they're just paranoid you're going to get spammed. Why are you asking for my phone number? I'm just trying to buy something online and you want my phone number? Why do you want it? I'm going to get a sales guy next time. And so they'll put in fake phone numbers. They'll try and avoid the question. So therefore, actually, first thing to do is not ask them for the phone number, but if you absolutely must, tell them why you're doing it. And so this example is e-commerce. So, okay, we're only going to use this if we need to contact you about your order. And you'll see consistently, if you add a little bit of reassuring text that makes sense, the drop-off rate on your phone number fields, or also your email fields, will lower because you're making it clear what you're going to do with the information. So people are more likely to give you that precious personal information. The next area is around error messages, because error messages, they tend to hit people almost at their lowest on the form. Something's gone wrong. You're like, oh, it's gone wrong here. So it's super important you get them right. And the first thing to do is to make sure your error messages are telling people how to fix the problem. You see the examples here. They're again, no offense to any devs in the audience, but typically don't let your developers write the error messages. You need someone to check it who's involved in the voice of customer, because you see the one on the left, that's a classic dev error message. It makes sense to any dev there, but to the average user, what the heck is a string? Well, what does this mean? So if you're just throwing stuff in like, oh, this is invalid, it's just going to annoy people more than it's going to help them. So you've got to think, okay, how can we be useful? How can we be helpful? If someone has made an error within our validation, how do we help fix them? And so obviously the fix is to be specific as possible. You see the examples on the left, obviously a simple example because it's an email address, but it says, okay, this is what's wrong. This is what you need to do to fix it. You can take it a level above that. If you look on the right-hand side, you can see sometimes if you're pretty sure someone's made a mistake, in this case, Hotmail versus Hotmail, you can have suggestions, and hopefully that will enable them to fix the problem a lot faster, and it'll be clear and they won't get annoyed by the fact you're not telling them what's going on. Also, make it absolutely crystal clear where the problem is. I don't know if you've ever seen forms like this where you click submit and there's a big load of red, but it's all at the top. And if you even see the red, you're going up and down. Well, where is it? What's the problem? I don't know where it is. So again, make sure your error messages are crystal clear on which field the problem is with. And as an example on that, you basically put the error messages next to the problem field. That makes it clear. You tell people, okay, this is where the issue is, and it's a bit of red right next to it. Nice and simple. Also, make sure you trigger them at the right time. Don't do it too early. I think we've all seen this phenomenon, which is kind of known in the UX trade as PEE, which is premature error ejaculation. That basically you're throwing an error out as soon as someone tries to put in a bit of information. Oh, error. Well, I've not even finished my email address yet. So make sure you're not doing that. Make sure you're telling them the error at the right time. And the fix essentially is, and what we always recommend is live validation. So basically you give them the feedback as soon as they focus out of the form. So they've completed it and moved on to the next one, but they get immediate feedback whether something is incorrect. But also importantly, if something's correct. You often see studies where if you're adding in a green tick it reduces the level of stress for someone because they're like, okay, I filled in this form field, particularly if it's a long form, it's correct. I'm not going to be told to go back and fix it again. So do both. If something's invalid, tell them immediately and tell them why. But if it's valid, make it clear, reduce their stress, help smooth the pathway through the form. So the fourth area to talk about is one that's kind of complicated, but it's asking for things that people don't want to give you. We've kind of touched on it before. Some things people really don't want to give you some pieces of information because they're not sure what's going on. And we talked about the phone number before. So essentially, if you're asking for a phone number, well, consider whether you need to ask for it, but tell people what you're doing with it. Because I say the phone number, if you look at the figures I gave before, I think it was second with about 6.4% of people interacting with the phone number field drop out on it. It's about 10% for password. However, if you consider the fact that the phone number is on about 75% of forms across the internet, and password is more like 10 to 20%, then actually the phone number is the biggest cause of form drop-offs across the internet. So always be careful with it and always manage people's expectations and why you need it. So that's the most common one, but there are other things you need to be careful of as well. So another thing, particularly if you work in financial services, personal questions on employment and income often scare people away. They either don't know them. Well, firstly, if you're asking for the employment, they might not be able to match their employment to their list that you've given them. But if you're asking for finances as well, they might not know exactly because you start saying, okay, what's your gross income? What's your net income? Oh, how much do you pay towards rent and mortgage? And people don't know off the top of their heads. They might go away and miss out. But equally, they're very nervous about giving you information. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to lose it? So again, here it's not so much saying what you're going to do with this information, although that's useful. It's about also saying what you won't do with the information, because that's what people are scared of. The classic thing, if you do user interviews on forms where you're asking them for their employment details, particularly if doesn't seem to be relevant, people are like, whoa, you're going to call my employer that I'm going to get a loan. Well, why are you calling my boss? It's none of his business that I'm applying for a loan. And you see that all the time. So the reality is you've got to explain why you're doing it, which is an example here. You can debate whether this is particularly good explanation because it doesn't explain what regulatory purposes is. And I imagine you did some testing on that. There'd be a bit of suspicion, but at least it's being clear we will not contact your employer. So you're being clear about that piece there. So again, always think, what to tell them what you're not going to do with information, what could be going through their mind when you're asking them. Because to you, it's just like, oh, we've got a form, we need to know their employment details because the back end says that we need to, or the marketing team or compliance tells us to do it. But almost always have someone who's acting as the voice of the customer on your form, going through it, thinking, okay, what would they think about this? And if you can, put it in front of some real customers before you put it live and get them, do some user testing on it to see what they think and if there's any nervousness. And if you can, and I say time and time again, just a little bit of micro copy will often just do the trick. It will reduce the anxiety. Another example of the ways to do this is not through micro copy, but we talked about personal income. Do you really need their exact personal income? What are you asking it for? Does it matter that much to you? If not, try using a formulation like this, a bracketed income. So basically someone doesn't feel that you know everything about them. And also makes it easier for them to remember, because they might be sure, well, I'm not quite sure about my exact income, but if you put in a bracket, it makes it much simpler for them, as well as reducing the anxiety. And then the final thing we're going to talk about today is about driving people away from your form and completely unnecessarily, sending them somewhere else. And by far the biggest culprit for this anywhere is the gift voucher or coupon code on a checkout. So again, if you see this on a checkout, what's the first thing you do? It's pretty much you go away and search for a coupon code, don't you? because, hey, there is one there, so why don't I go out there? And then you go away and you can say, oh, I've got a coupon code. Yes, I've got a coupon code. You come back, you put it in. No, not valid. Okay, I'll go again. And you see this time and time again. If we look at Zuko data or Zuko sessions, you see people bouncing around, and they'll basically, and often will drop out if they can't find one, because even if there are no coupon codes there, they get so annoyed they decide to leave. And it's an interesting phenomenon because we segment the data between mobile and desktop. It works for both of them, but actually you see it even more so on mobile, because people can't just simply open another tab and just flip through and do it quickly. So they get so annoyed and forget about it, and they go away. And sometimes they come back and complete the purchase later, but sometimes they don't. So I think we're guilty, and platforms like Shopify are often guilty of just placing this, and they place it in the most obvious place possible just before you're about to pay. So it just catches people, right, I'm going to get that. I'm going to get this. So there are various different ways you can mitigate this. Personally, we like making it clear what coupon codes you can get. But from a design pattern standpoint, often the best way of doing it is not to completely hide it, but just to put it behind a link, something like this. So essentially, you're not tricking people. Anyone who does have a code can find it relatively easily, but it's not a big box in front of them that drives people to go away. And we've seen patterns like this work really well in terms of reducing drop-off. So don't drive them away. There's other reasons you might drive them away as well, but this is by far the most common one. So if you work in any sort of e-commerce or anywhere where someone's paying, consider what you're doing with the promo code field. So essentially, those are the 5 big, broad areas. But I appreciate there's lots of different things about forms that will cause people to drop out, and we've seen most of them. So what I suggest is we perhaps have a question and answer session. If you want to learn more, we've produced a lot of content around that in terms of how you optimize forms, how you use data to optimize forms. So there's some links there, but there's others. But if you want to talk forms outside of this forum, feel free to email me or just link in. It's probably the best way to do it. I share every week lots of stuff about form optimization. So if you follow me or link in, you'll get a lot of that. Or you can send me a message, and happy to talk anyone's forms. If you said, just give me an opinion on this form.
Alan, I'm super disappointed that you didn't make people fill out a form to talk to you. That's really kind of a letdown, buddy. Like, please fill out my type form. But next time. Well, thank you so much, Alan. That is a killer diagnosis of the 5 things that ail the forms. And to those ends, we have been pooling questions in the background. So I'm going to bring people on the mic to ask their specific questions. Again, I'm going to put that, I did just put the link. So you all know that the Google Doc is there, and I'm pulling the questions from that Google Doc. So this character, Brad in Vienna. Guten Tag, Brad. I hear you have a question for us.
We don't say Guten Tag here, we say Grüß Gott, so Grüß Gott.
Oh, wow. Okay, well then never mind. I just got Austrianed. What's your question?
Yeah, no, so my question is really about cultural differences, oddly enough, right? Like, obviously cultural differences can impact a form abandonment rates. I'm wondering if there are any tips on adapting forms to international audiences that you could share, Alan.
Yeah, so there's probably 2 aspects to this question. One is the way that people interact with forms and the internet in general. But then one is also how do you adapt for some simple cultural differences. The first one is pretty complex. If you look at studies of, for example, how Japanese people interact with the internet, I don't know if you've ever been to Japanese websites, particularly ones that are not particularly new. They're happy to have all sorts of stuff plastered over it. And that's kind of come from the Japanese design ethos. So I don't propose to get into too much there, but how can you yourself take account of cultural differences? So a few tips. So one is with the name field, because often the use of the name field is very European. It's first name, last name, but so Northern European even as well. But what if you're from a Latin culture where you've got multiple last names that are included? Or what if you're from an Asian culture where it's the other way around? The family name is usually done first. And typically what we would say is just have a 1 name field. and get your back end to then use the logic to put that in. We know the reason why there's a first name, last name. It's because you use HubSpot or Salesforce and your database says you need a first name and last name because you need to mail merge. But actually, if you can take that thing away from people, then do so. Other things are around formatting of phone numbers. Again, different cultures have, well, that's not really culture. It's just essentially the US is formatted differently. Often you'll have brackets and dashes compared to Europe, where you have spaces. You have similar things when you're looking at money, whether it's a comma or whether it's a dot. Typically, you can address this in the phone number field if you're already asking people for their dialing code with the little flags, and you can then do a format mask. But failing that, typically what we just recommend is just let them put it in again how they want to, and then have your back-end logic take out the spaces, take out the dashes. And we see people are quite insistent on trying to force people into a format, but actually when you ask them, well, what are you going to do with this? And it's like, oh, well, it goes to our call center. It's like, okay, well, who's looking at those numbers? Oh, it's a caller, someone on a call center. Well, they're able to work that out themselves. You don't need to do all that sort of stuff. So those are two examples that kind of jump readily to mind. I don't know if, Brad, if you have any other specific things you were thinking about?
No, that's great. Those are actually my top two frustrations. And maybe just in country codes or zip codes. So zip codes sometimes have different numbers depending on what country you're in. Here in Australia, there are 4 numbers, and in the US it would be 5. And so sometimes you can't enter your zip code just because you don't have the right number of digits. Like that's really frustrating. So what do? Sometimes you just, personally, I just ditch the form.
Yeah, exactly. And date of birth is another one as well, because Europe
True, yeah.
conventions, and you can always get caught out there. Often it's minor, people work it out, but actually,
Right.
if you're clear on what you're asking for, and also
Mm.
ideally you would adapt it, and we've seen some good executions where people adapt it. Either someone has said which country they're from to start with, or sometimes through IP address. It's like, okay, you're coming from this. We're putting a version of the form with the conventions that you would be used in your own country. So that's advanced level stuff, but yeah, it can be very effective.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brad. That was a great question. Mira in Bowling Green. I'm assuming that's Bowling Green, Ohio. Are you on the call still? Because if you are, you can come on the mic. This is like or I can ask for you. So Mira wanted to know, what are some best practices for doing user research on form optimization? I think that's a great question.
Yeah. Okay. User research. So the qual and quant aspects. Obviously, for quant, we'd say use Zuko. Put it on your form, and you can see what's going on. You can quantify the drop off. Other user research. I'm sure you guys like Lindsay and the team are better at the user research than I am. But again, it's about putting it in front of people. So whether you use some software or to help you do that, or whether you just sit people in a room and run through it. After you've run through it yourself to see anything's obviously broken. But yeah, it doesn't have to be complex. Just get some people who are in the audience, or who, your mother or something that's not used to the conventions, wants to fill it in. I'm constantly, my dad, I was always filling out health forms, and he gets so frustrated I have to go through and do it for him. So just actually that sort of thing teases out things like accessibility, which you won't pick up if you're just looking at it yourself, because hey, we're all looking on a nice big monitor screen or a big iPhone. Not everyone's like that. You should test it from that end. And so linked to that is test it on multiple device types as well, because we often see when we do segmentation analysis, we'll see, there's a problem, there's a particular question, it seems fine, but if you look at a specific audience, for example, maybe it's an Android users, or people are using a particular browser, everyone's dropping off. What's going on there? And then you see, example, it's a drop down and it's a terrible execution on that format. So you make sure, so I've rambled a little, but make sure you show it to people, but segment the audience, so segment by device type as well.
Yeah, Rocky, I'm sorry, Rocky has his hand raised, so I was looking at that. Alan, I was going to say, my father recently passed, and I feel like he could have and he was a very bright man, and a lawyer. He's good at digital stuff, but I feel like he almost needed a person to sit around and fill out his forms on the regular. Like we could have hired someone to fill out forms for my dad for all his medical stuff. It was that ridiculous.
And the frustrating thing is usually you then go to the doctor and they ask you the same questions you filled in before.
Yeah, it's just absurd. Rocky, do you have a question then that links into this? I'm gonna come off the mic, or is your hand still, is it up from previously?
No, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Alan. Alan, I am a big fan of asking only 3 questions, whether it is filling up a form or whether it is asking for feedback. Irrespective of industry, if I were to ask you, you only can put 3 things on the form to collect from new prospects of users. What would that be? And the same thing for collecting feedback, irrespective of industry. After they have used your product or service, what are the 3 things that you would ask them? One, when they are a prospect, and one after they have used your product and service. What are the 3 things that you would ask each, irrespective of industry?
So you're talking about this from a user research thing rather than the sign up thing. Am I correct?
So first one is sign up. They're a prospect.
Yeah.
And the second one is after they have used the product and service, and you are, let's say, doing some sort of a net promoter score, you are asking for feedback. What would you ask them? 3 questions each.
Well, in those cases, I probably wouldn't even ask 3 questions. I would probably, if you're just looking at sign up for a prospect, I would just look at email address.
Yeah.
And ideally what I would do is just infer everything else from that. So I'm assuming B2B here, to be fair, different B2C, but you can obviously infer the company size, all that sort of stuff. You don't need to ask a million questions, and you've probably got the name as well. I mean, you might want to ask the name potentially, just so you're clear on it if you're going to be contacting them. But, that's the maximum 2 I would ask usually, because you don't need to ask the rest of it. If you're only asking 3 questions for feedback, regardless of sector, so this is more a user research thing, which I'm less of an expert in, but the question I always like is after, is there anything else you want to tell us about product?
No, let me elaborate. I'm talking, so let's say you purchased shoes and you are simply seeking feedback. Did you like the shoe or not? What are the 3 things that you could ask? Or you purchased a training course, or for that matter, if a survey is sent after this session, what are the 3 things that you would like us to share? What did you like? What did you dislike? What would be those 3 questions like? After a user has purchased and used your product or service. So it's not mostly research, it's feedback that you are seeking. What feedback questions should you ask?
So I'm not a feedback person per se, or a form UX, but essentially you can use net promoter score, but I know that's been going down. It's almost like a thumbs up or thumbs down. I'm more interested in the qual feedback from something like that. So it would be the final question. You might have a quant thing so you can compare it, whether that's net promoter score or something else. But I would typically, when we do feedback, it's okay, what did you like? What did you dislike? And then is there anything else you want to tell us about our product? Just give them the leeway to give it back to you. If you lead people down paths, they're going to give you, going to give you what you want to hear potentially. So just that's my thing. But I say, I'll caveat that with that. I'm no UX research expert in qual. I say we're more forms and quant.
This is very helpful. Thank you.
Of note, I put our newsletter form in there again, not just as a gratuitous plug, though it is. But at one point in time, our newsletter had like 15 forms. I'm being silly, but it had a lot of forms to fill out. And Kristen was like, "Why do we have so many fields? It should just be email." And so it is now. We just get people's emails because that's all we really need to engage with people downstream. With that, the next question would be from Sharon in Seattle. Sharon, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I just actually completed a project on this very topic, and most of them didn't involve any of these kind of errors. But there were what I'd call pauses that were more like psychological, that I thought caused anxiety. And I wondered if there are some common themes, like you can see logistical friction. You can anticipate sometimes cognitive friction by looking at the data too. Are there some times when you've seen pause or drop-offs in conversion that have a psychological barrier?
Yes, I'm trying to think of the best examples. Did you have specific examples, Sharon, from your that you're talking about there?
Not specifically. I was interested in learning more about it. So we identified several, but it was kind of unique to this particular product.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I could generalize it. I'm just trying to think of, yeah.
I'm just trying to think of stuff that I've not already spoken about, because obviously things that any personal data, you're going to get people pausing because they're just worried about what you're going to do with it. If you're looking at other psychological tricks, things like the coupon code is a classic psychology that people go, it's not friction, it's more fear of loss. So it's like the FOMO. If you set someone up for something, if you ask them a question about if you ask them a question that infers that they should be getting something that they're not, that's always going to cause the friction. I think one of the things, it's kind of a psychological, well, it's a structural trick. We see it in insurance forms all the time, that people so hate giving you personal data that the most successful forms are the ones that don't ask for it to start with, because people are filling in an insurance form typically to get a quote. So if you can take out all that friction, just something as simple as an email, like that's enough to get people to drop off. If you just say, okay, give me your information. Okay, what car is it you've got? What's the details? What's your mileage? I'll give you a quick quote. And then once they've got the quote, if they want to progress, then you can ask them for more details. You see that little trick can improve your lead generation or your completion rate a lot, if that makes sense. I'll try and think of some others as well. But say in insurance, you see that if you flip the questions and don't ask them we usually have a principle in forms where you would say, give them the easy questions first, because it gets them into the room.
Yeah.
But in this case, you would say no, because it's insurance. That's actually ask them some of the easy questions last. Ask them the difficult questions first, because that's what they want. They want to give you the answer, the things that are going to get them the quote, because that's what they're after.
That's a good observation. That's good. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Lindsay, you had a great question about a blog post that Alan wrote.
Yeah, so I guess it's not fair to bring in outside material, but you were talking about sort of the surprising lack of correlation, it seemed like, between number of form fields and completion rates.
Yes, so it's an interesting one. It's always a question we get asked, how many form fields should we ask? And it's not a simple question. Obviously, the studies out there, HubSpot did one, reduce your form fields, improve your completion rate. And to a degree, that's true, in that every time you're asking a new question, you're creating friction and might cause someone to drop off. However, there's scenarios where this doesn't hold, and there's two scenarios. One is where the motivation is high. And so if you look at our database, there's we did a cross tabulation between the number of questions on a form and the completion rate, and looked at it by sector. And what we saw is government forms had the highest number of questions that were asked. That's terrible, everyone will be dropping out. But they had the highest completion rate. So what's going on there? Well, actually, it's nothing to do with the form experience, because they were generally pretty terrible form experiences. It was just, they had a monopoly. If you want to get your bins collected, if you want to file your tax return, there's nowhere else you can go. So the motivation to complete was high. So they can get away with that bad form experience. Obviously, if you have competition, then you can't do that. Then the other area where just cutting form fields didn't necessarily hold was in some levels of some types of lead generation, and also other forms where people were expecting a certain level of question. So, for example, a high ticket item about you're getting a new kitchen. It's like, okay, you've got a lead gen form, you're booking a consultant inquiry. In that case, kind of going back on what I said before, because obviously it depends is always an answer. But in that case, if you would just, when they tested it and just looked at just name and email, did not perform as well as if they asked a lot of questions about someone's kitchen, because someone was going, they were expecting a consultation with a knowledgeable person about kitchen design. And so therefore, if you're just getting an email address, it seems a little bit light. So the fact you were adding in questions about their kitchen, what they were looking for, that sort of stuff, people were more engaged. They would tended to think, okay, these people know what they're doing. So in that case, adding form fields improved the completion rate. So whilst there's a general rule, remove questions you don't need to ask, there are occasions where adding questions will improve, but you only truly know that through testing and learning.
Interesting. It reminds me of the doctor example we were complaining about earlier, right? I want him or her to ask me all these things ahead of time, and then I'm going to get in the room. They're going to ask it again.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Thank you. And Lindsay, I quickly was looking for that blog, but couldn't find the exact blog because Alan's so prolific. So if you could find it, and put it in the chat, that would be rad. I know Junaid had to leave, so excuse me, I'm going to probably sneeze, but he was hoping I could ask this question for him.
I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, you're back. Ask
Yeah.
the question because I'm going to sneeze.
Good. Yeah, thanks, Alan. So my question was around so we have a problem like basically like we do these health quizzes, and at the end of it the user has an opportunity to like create an account with the like our product. And we're seeing like an issue where there's a really high like motivation to complete the form, but not many people feel like that they like want to actually create an account. And then when they actually see the results to the quizzes, because it's like a health quiz, they tend to not really interact as much. So do you have any sort of like from your experiences, maybe in a similar like with similar product, things that come to mind are like BuzzFeed or something like that, where you've seen like there's like these results, or there's a need to do a conversion at the end of a form, what's been helpful and what's like been actually useful.
So it sounds like it's kind of like an e-commerce scenario. I know it's not exactly the same in that you get someone to the end and then you're asking to create an account.
Yeah.
So with this, we'd definitely say I would do a experimentation program, test and learn. So the way, well, the best way to do it is to observe real behavior, because you can ask them and you might, hopefully if you manage to get some customers and you ask them why did they not complete, they'll tell you something truthful. They don't always, but that should not be taken as gospel. It should be used to inform hypotheses. So your hypothesis might be if we incentivize them to set an account, they'll do that. Again, I don't know if that would, or if we explain more the benefits of setting up an account, they would do it. And then run your A/B tests. So you basically got two audiences and see essentially how they behave when you make a change in the flow, and get to statistical significance and see, okay, does this move the needle? Does this get more people signing up? I say the best way to get the hypothesis is to speak to them, but as I say, it's not always easy to get truthful answers from them. So the best thing is use what you can to then create hypotheses and test them, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And Alan, as I pull up the final slide here, can you just talk about what resources are available at the Zuko website?
Yeah, so we've got blog and also white papers on a lot of forms, as you would expect. So we've got blogs on pretty much every type of form field, and it'll say, okay, here's some tips that you might want to try to improve them. We've got general ebooks you can download. We've got sector specific stuff, so on insurance, on financial services. We've got, how do you use data to do it? We've got a form health check. If you want to submit your form for a very quick health check, just to say, okay, what's going on here? What's the good, the bad? Using heuristics, sadly, but to start with. But obviously, we'd prefer if you added Zuko and you could track the data and you can prove it, if that makes sense. So, but lots of stuff on forms. Say very one-dimensional in the sense, but if your business and organization is reliant on forms, then there's a lot of useful stuff there. Or just ping me a LinkedIn message and ask me a question.
No, and to your point, yeah, someone asked, like, do you have any example of good forms? And I just was kind of like, well, I think there are bajillions at the site. And obviously, yeah, continue the discussion with Alun at LinkedIn or his email address. To those ends, if everybody could give a virtual round of applause to Alun. We did notice, Alun, I don't know if you know this, but on your comedy video, Zoom actually filters out background noise. So even if we were, so it's a little strange because he's doing the bit and you could see people laughing, but it filters out all the applause and stuff. Yeah, so it's interesting. So even if we all came off mic and clapped, Zoom is actually so good with its audio, you would feel underappreciated. So thank you so much for your time and energy today. To everybody, of course, should you want to collaborate with Irrational Labs, we love to rock it with product design, B-side training, and AI strategy. So hello, reach out at hello@irrationallabs.com and be sure to follow our newsletter and Kristen's Substack. Until next month, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you in the US, have a brilliant Memorial Day. Stay out of trouble. Alun, thank you again for your energy and Tron-like background. So we will see you soon. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.